the topic I'll be covering is correlation. So what I'll be covering in here will be the general information as to what it is, how it is used, examples of it being used, its limitations, and the conclusion. So correlation is the connection of two variables, and it determines the size and direction of that relationship. And this next part will come up a lot in this presentation, which is that correlation is not causation. It's often confused as that, but it does not immediately mean that a change in one variable causes the immediate change in another. That would be causation, which is about cause and effect, where one event will directly impact the change in that variable, whereas correlation simply indicates the connection and how those variables correlate. And the correlation coefficient measures the relationship between the two variables, which is represented by a lowercase r, which can never be less than -1 or higher than +1. When measuring correlation direction, there are different types. There's the positive correlation, negative, and then there's no correlation. And as you can see, with the positive correlation, as those variables increase, those values will increase as well, whereas negative correlations is the opposite, where the negative values will match the corresponding negative values. No correlation would be represented like this chart right here, where values are in opposite directions and then there's no direct predictive line there. And the absolute value of r determines the strength in the correlation, where a perfect linear relationship would be where r equals +1, while no linear relationship would make r 0. And oftentimes variables can be spread out, where r can be anything between -1 to 0 or 0 to +1, and that's when the strength is determined, whether it's very strong or moderate, which will be depicted later. So the coefficient of determination is represented by r squared, which signifies the proportion of variation in one variable, which is also represented in the other variable. And this video from Khan Academy goes into depth about how that r squared is calculated or used. Here we have the Pearson R formula, where it indicates the correlation of determination, where values closer to -1 or +1 indicate a stronger correlation. They are more predictive, whereas values closer to 0 indicate a weaker correlation because they are less predictive. So understanding what these symbols mean will allow us to determine that strength, and anything that gives a more predictive value will be helpful in understanding how the relationship is between those variables just by looking at the value and then looking at the visual graph that goes with it. And this chart and these graphs do a great job in determining those relationships, where understanding how anything closer to +1 indicate a very high correlation, where the opposite is for anything closer to -1, where it's a strong negative correlation. Anything closer to 0 would be a low positive or low negative correlation, or anything that would not represent one at all. Such as here, R value is very close to 0, where making this a scatter plot, whereas this equals -0.8, making it a strong negative correlation. The line of best fit would be able to go through here to indicate that negative correlation. Now, when thinking about correlation and causation, this is very important to think about because it's something that many decision makers or business makers will fall for, thinking that correlation means causation, which then leads to them making bad decisions or creating misinformation. For example, as you can see in this chart, hot weather causes sunburn, which then you could see the causation would be an increase in sunscreen sales and ice cream sales. And the correlation would simply be that ice cream and sunscreen sales increase during the summer. This isn't to say that ice cream sales cause sunscreen sales to increase or vice versa. Rather, they both correlate because they both have the shared cause of hot weather causing their sales to go up. And understanding the correlation is important for research because it allows experts to then be guided in determining which actions cause another effect. So understanding how variables correlate will give them pieces of a puzzle to then dive in and dig deeper in understanding the direct events that cause the actions. And these can be very useful for making predictions, very useful for predictive analysis, and it's used for identifying trends and patterns, which can be very useful for anyone in businesses or social media campaigns where they're able to then see which events are consistent and which trends to remain on. And as you can see in this illustration, the market research used to gather data about an audience in practice can be useful for advertising, marketing, understanding risk, products, customer info, and understanding how to deal with competitors, because understanding this data, whether it be gathered through surveys, interviews, or online trackers, it will allow for decision makers to then see which variables correlate, such as which strategies were able to yield certain outcomes, and within it they know which ways of thinking will guide them to understanding the cause of the outcomes they would like or any outcomes they would like to prevent so that they do not bring in certain variables. And in this scenario, a fashion brand may believe that having a popular celebrity or public figure modeling in their clothing will increase sales. And when understanding how strong the correlation is in these variables, such as which celebrity it is and their attractiveness level, as well as trustworthiness and purchase intention, these are variables which correlate. And looking at these values, we know that anything closer to +1 would indicate a positive correlation. So this would be a positive correlation, whereas 0.9 over here would be a very strong positive correlation, whereas 0.3 would be one that's harder to read. There would be a moderate, if not no correlation, given that it's harder to predict as to how those variables would correlate. And when a company is analyzing the connection between a celebrity endorsement and sales, they would be able to look into customer feedback as well as the trends developed from this, as well as the overall publicity gained, which then allows them to build more on their strategies and understand how these correlating values then lead to certain events causing their business to gain more activity. So in this example, we see Shreya notices most of her bilingual students in her class have a higher set of test scores. Based on this, which is the best description, so we know that given that most of her students are bilingual, this would be a value that's increasing given that they know a higher set of languages, whereas the test scores, they are higher, making these both values that are increasing, making this a positive correlation as depicted in this chart. And this isn't to say that being bilingual is what causes high test scores, but rather by being bilingual and doing well on a test correlate. And so within this, we know that this would be a positive correlation. In this example, we see that data from one country shows that individuals with a college degree have a positive correlation with the individual's life expectancy. And now we know that having a college degree does not cause life expectancy to go up, but we have to think about which of the following factors would explain why this would not imply that. So in this case, we know that a college degree can then allow one to have the ability to have a higher paying job and then pay for a good place to live with better health care, which would be a direct effect of having more wealth, making wealth be one of the variables that then causes life expectancy to go up, making B the proper choice in this scenario, because a college degree and life expectancy simply correlate and have all these variables that then cause each other to have an effect. So at times when a correlation should not be used would be any instance where the relationship is not linear. When outliers are present, they also should not be used. As depicted in these charts, a parabola is caused with the nonlinear relationship, and then over here there are too many outliers to really have a solid prediction, making this line of best fit not as effective in having enough prediction. And then for heteroscedasticity, it happens when standard errors over a variable over a specific amount of time are non-constant, as depicted in here. In here, they stretch out in different directions, which again makes it hard to really make predictions and understand which variables correlate. And also, correlation should not be used when values are measured on an ordinal scale, which is based on order and rank. And this TED Talk goes in depth in another concept we touched upon earlier, which is where many individuals make the mistake of thinking correlation means causation, which can then lead to a misconception of certain information, then leading to misinformation. And this is common a lot on social media. People will often see headlines where it makes it look like a certain diet or exercise or factor in their life causes something, when in reality that just means that those factors correlate, and within the study there are certain causes that are brought up when those variables that were mentioned in the headline are simply correlating to each other. And in this TED Talk, Jennifer Goldbeck goes into how there can be this misconception that curly fries means that you're very intelligent, where in reality it was just seen on social media that a majority of people who have had higher intelligence seem to like posts that had curly fries in it. So it didn't mean that curly fries caused your intelligence or vice versa. It was simply this activity that indicated these values, these variables in correlating. It can also lead to individuals overlooking any privileges and limitations of a group. For example, if a university is collecting data on the educational achievement of students and making that correlation between skin color and academic achievement, it may spread this false narrative, as in claiming that being white is what causes higher achievements, when it's important to acknowledge and understand the variables within it, which is that white students are given more privileges and may have different income levels that then generate such opportunities for them to be able to excel in academic achievements, whereas students of color do not have these privileges and will face more boundaries that prevent them from being able to gain access to such academic achievement status, which it's important to think about, because if spreading that narrative of skin color resulting in that academic achievement can create more injustice and harm towards already underrepresented groups. And understanding the correlation then leads decision makers to understand the variables that cause this harm, so that they can make better decisions to benefit these underrepresented groups. So overall, we know that correlation is what determines the strength and how variables are related, and this is a very important fact, is that it does not mean causation, and the R value is what indicates strength and type of a correlation. And overall, correlation is helpful in analyzing trends to make proper decisions, because it's important to know which variables correlate, but then use that and look deeper into seeing which factors and variables play a role in actually causing certain events and happening. And thank you for listening. Here are my works cited.